Topic for September 2021 of the Catholic Steps meetings and newsletters is consciousness, Catholic Lecture 175. And I break these into 4 subtopics. And as I went through the lecture, I couldn't do it. I didn't have the heart to edit this lecture down to what I needed to edit down to for the shorter study guides that I create. On the presumption that if you want to read the full lecture, that's what you'll do. The study guide is intended to bounce around and pull out subtopics so that you can find something that you might be interested in if the entire lecture does not sing to you. And you can play with at least one section. But I had trouble this time, so this is going to be part 1, and I'll do part 2 in October or another month. Sometimes I'll skip a few months before I get back to a lecture. I wanted to alert people that this was a very short portion of what is contained in the lectures. So the 4 subtopics of this half is creation being the result of consciousness. Rather than creating consciousness, consciousness creates. The second was awareness, consciousness, creates power. The third is consciousness in motion. In other words, consciousness has to be in motion. It can't sit still because consciousness doesn't exist. If it is static, it isn't consciousness anymore. And the fourth involves health and emotions. And that was such a huge topic that I just left some hints on it and decided I'd think about addressing it at another time. So the first part, creation is the result of consciousness. There's another lecture, Catholic Lecture 119, that talks about movement, consciousness, and experience as a triad where you cannot take one out. You cannot eliminate one of the 3. They depend on each other. There's none can exist without the other. So movement requires consciousness in order to move. And experience requires movements. That's what experience is. It's gaining something. Experience requires movement, which requires consciousness. And consciousness by itself can't continue to be by itself. It moves. And the movement creates experience. The idea was to go back to consciousness as being the instigator of this, but it's a little bit like the Big Bang. It's the instigator, but everything follows so fast. It's an intellectual exercise to separate one from the others. When a nanosecond later, the other 2 exist. So that's creation as the result of consciousness. And the guide went so much into that that became a whole section. The second is that awareness creates power. Now here, I have to differentiate between the kind of power we speak about in spiritual growth and development versus external power. Learning about my spiritual being, finding my freedom, exercising my freedom, all this is wonderful for my personal power. It may not translate to specific job changes or promotions. It may not translate in my being able to change people's minds. Let's say that awareness creates the potential for power. And then you have to engage other factors, movement and experience, for instance. So I may have the awareness and the consciousness, and I may be in motion, but if I don't have the experience to figure out how to connect with people, then I can't meet them and I can't invite them to meet me in a way where they will accept the invitation. So while awareness creates power, that's only the beginning. And one of the things that's saying to me about this lecture is when I work with people, I tend to go taking a step back and a step back and a step back. Sometimes mentioning the lecture on cause and effect, which is Patrick Lecture 196. Sometimes what we're dealing with is an effect, and we can work with it as much as we want. But if the cause is still active, the cause will simply create more effects. So we become busy. We're very busy cleaning up the effect. But when we find the cause, we can reduce or eliminate a large portion of the effects that cause was creating. And then the way I like to explain life is we advance to a next level of the video game. It's not that life gets easy. It's not that there aren't challenges, but the challenges are more appropriate for your level of spiritual development. In effect, you've aced that level. And in that way, you create space for different experiences. And this is the kind of power that the lectures really speak of. If you don't have that kind of power to manage your own life, then any artificial or external power is not going, it's going to wind up creating effects because there's no spiritual cause to support it. And this takes us back to creation is the result of consciousness. Creation without consciousness, there's always some consciousness, but creation without much consciousness is weak. It may exist for a period of time, but it's weak. Creation with consciousness brings the entire force of our being into it. And it is a stronger effect because the cause is stronger. The consciousness is stronger. So awareness creates power versus force. It sounds like a nuance, but it's important. So once again, we're dealing with spiritual matters here. We're talking about inner work, not how to fix your relationship per se. That will naturally result if you address the issues in you, if you address the invitations you're issuing. And this is where we talk about conscious and unconscious. If you address the unconscious invitations that you're sending out and stop sending them out, then people won't be answered. So the idea is to become more aware of what you're inviting. And the inviting is a form of creating. What opening have you created that people say yes to, and that's not what you intended? So working on our personal work, repeating too many words, doing personal work will naturally affect our relationships. It will affect our work, our friendships. It will affect everything in our lives. It'll affect how we get up in the morning and what we do. How we walk is affected by who we are and what consciousness we have. And yet to expect immediate results is foolhardy. This is not about getting an answer. This is not about fixing something. This is about finding yourself. It's a different task than a lot of people would like it to be, because we're dealing with problems in life. We'd like the problems fixed. This is more of a long-term review and look at who we are when we study modalities of this kind. So awareness creates power was the second. The third was consciousness in motion. And this is an example. I have been editing the lectures. Sometimes when the only analogy I can think of is for some reason I'm able to go up and do a high wire act, and then I come down and I look up and think, wow, I don't know how I did that. I don't know how I had the courage and the guts to edit the lectures. But I will go through a lecture and say, yes, yeah, now we don't need that. Yeah, we can use that, but we're not going to use that. I'm not trying to permanently edit the lectures. What I'm trying to do is bring the structure more to the surface so that people have a better idea what it's about. The lectures have a lot of words in them. They are not, they didn't do a lot of paragraph spacing. So the paragraphs are half a page, page and a half. And it can be very dense. And it's easier to realize a point's being made if it's done in more bite-sized chunks. This is my rationale for having edited the lectures for years. I feel as if I've lost my nerve. That's why I bring up the high wire act. I feel like I've lost my nerve. Perhaps you felt this way when if you drive a car and you've had an accident, suddenly you feel like you can't drive a car anymore. Or if you've dropped something valuable, you're nervous about holding on to the next thing you pick up. Suddenly I find it much, much more difficult than normal to prune a lecture down to specific points. This is not the first time it happened with Patrick Lecture 158 as well, a few months ago. What Patrick has taught me to do is look more deeply than that. Yes, I may have lost my nerve. That may be true. But what might the positive spiritual meaning of that be? What could have prompted this attitude of mine, this reluctance? And what I like to invite people to do is when they are focusing too much on a negative possibility, that is possible. Now, let's widen the list of options. Name 3 positive aspects that could also be true. In other words, you're welcome to say that the negative is happening, as long as you're selecting it among a large variety of items, instead of having limited your view to only a negative answer. It's all you see, so you are holding it very tightly. Example, I could have lost my nerve, or I may have selected coincidentally. Patrick's guide says there's no coincidence. I may have coincidentally selected 2 lectures that have such depth for this time period. So the idea of consciousness is that I am, without necessarily wanting to be or realizing, I am connected to everyone, but I am connected more deeply on some level that I cannot access. I am connected more deeply to the people who read my newsletters, come to my meetings, or watch my videos. The trick, and I don't mean to minimize, but those who know me know that it's easier to tease about it than get wrapped up with abstractions. Sometimes I can name why I do things. I'm very clear about that. I have always found it more difficult when I'm following my intuition, and I can't give you a more superficial, perhaps, but useful, rational explanation for it. I have been experimenting, exploring some energy work, energy healing classes. I have been attempting to deepen my ability to access intuition on a more conscious level, meaning it's there. I may be able to act on it, but I don't have a lot of confidence. I don't have the clarity that allows me to move forward with great ease. I take little tiny steps and I'm awkward about it. I'm afraid to be wrong. So I've taken these classes because I wanted to increase my consciousness, my awareness of how my intuition works. It does not mean it's going to operate perfectly, because the part of me that is speaking to you, the ego level, which we studied in Patrick Lecture 158, the 2-parter, my ego level could pick the wrong reasons, and it can misunderstand, it can misinterpret. It can grab things and enjoy them and not continue to look around for other meanings. There are 10,000 ways I can misinterpret intuition. However, if I'm working very hard to be generous and fair and open and perceptive and sensitive. I still have trouble figuring out what my intuition's about. So I went and got more tools. While I can't name it, I don't think I've lost my nerve about editing the lectures. It is possible. Once again, the three things, coming up with three positives. It is possible that the people that I am addressing who read my stuff are ready to go deeper. And while for some people, one lecture a month is too slow, they would be perfectly fine with one lecture a week. In fairness to the lectures, you can work on a lecture for years at a time. It doesn't look like reading it every single day, but a sentence can inspire you to look around during a week's time and see things differently, and that is going to inform the next sentence or back it up a page or to see other things in a different light. You can work on one lecture your entire life. If that's true, then surely the topic of consciousness, or from 158, the topic of how the ego obstructs the real self, surely these could deserve at least 8 different subtopics and more time. What I found out from the 2-part Pathric Lecture 158 experience was that we did go deeper. In fact, we went so deeply that we ran out of things to share. The meetings got shorter. That can be a very powerful and important aspect of discussion, to feel that you are completely done. Think of it like eating a meal where you have all the time you need. And when we had holidays in my family, you wander back into the kitchen and have another bite or two. And then you wander back in, have another bite or two. And then somebody brings a plate out. And that's how we wound up with 3-4 hour meals. We didn't sit at the table for 3 or 4 hours, but you extended the taste experience, the sharing experience for the rest of the evening, for the rest of the day. And that's what I felt happened during the meetings, is we ran that lecture to the ground. We got everything out of it that we possibly could. That does not mean that you can't turn around and read that a week later, a month later, a year later, and jump in again and get a great deal more out of it. And you can accept that for now, we're pretty much done, gotten everything we can out of it. So this is one of the things I looked at when I felt this incapacity to edit the lectures. The second thing I felt was that I was going off in too many directions. I do bring in a lot of different things into the lectures. I play personally, and in doing the study guides, I share my playing. And I just found that it was starting to feel scattered. I couldn't tell people why this seemed to matter. But one of the things that I became more aware of in the energy courses that I took was this, just because I can't explain it doesn't mean it's not valid. And I'm not very good with abstract thoughts, so I immediately want to analogize it to, there are good cooks in my family. There are great cooks in my family. And they know when to stop adding spices. They know when to take things off the grill. They know when to pull things out of the oven and sit them on the counter where the item keeps cooking so that it's perfect once it's down to room temperature. I don't have that skill. I tend to oversalt and overcook. And even an awareness of that doesn't mean that that's my skill set. However, I find that to be a spiritual experience. I begin to realize that I rush a little bit and that I'm impatient and I push a little bit too much. So that for me, the awareness that that may be true in the kitchen, I bring to the meetings. And I think in terms of slowing down and allowing a slightly different pace than I am personally used to, so that we can see where the group wants to go because it's not about me. Now, going on a bit, but this is where I got excited about the lecture and I began thinking, that's fine, we'll split it in half. And once I did, it clicked together. I got the 4 topics and it felt right. And that's how I follow my intuition. So it is, even in explaining it to you, it is uncomfortable to not have a lovely rational outline for what I do. And yet, as I work with people, part of my work is about finding, I don't have a word for this. There's a rational in the irrational. Irrational just means we don't know how we got there. So we can't repeat it and we can't share it. We can't communicate it. But it has its own rationality. It has its own logic on a level that we're not in tune with, in touch with, aware of. And so this month, I'm letting my intuition and my consciousness guide me into exploring and experimenting. That is what consciousness is all about. So it is a thrill for me to present these lectures because I live them, I learn from them. And that enables me to support others in their learning. I do hope you read the entire lecture. It's a really great lecture and you're only getting a taste of it this month. So thank you for listening. Take care.